What do you do when your wife presses a shopping list into your hand, kisses your cheek, and sends you out for groceries, only for you to walk back in too early and find your neighbor in the home you pay for? How can a quiet husband, called jealous and controlling by his own family and by the people on his street, turn that moment into a calm, lawful response instead of a shouting match? Why does the real answer arrive not in the stairwell or the kitchen, but weeks later in a bright public lobby where someone calls her name and hands her an envelope? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Corin Vale, and for most of my life, people have described me with the same two words: calm and helpful. At work, calm and helpful are good words. In an office full of broken printers, forgotten passwords, and panicked emails, nobody complains when the IT guy is quiet and steady. At home, those same words slowly became an insult, especially when my wife, Renee, started telling people I was calm because I had no passion and helpful because I cared more about systems than about people. I did not feel that change happen all at once. It came in small pieces, like the first time she called our downstairs neighbor more spontaneous than me and laughed as if it were harmless. We live in a 3-story building on a narrow street, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's routines without trying. Our apartment is on the 2nd floor with a small balcony that looks over the parking area and the street beyond. Directly below us lives Mason, the neighbor everyone in the building calls when something breaks. He is an electrician with a good smile, always ready to tighten a loose handle or change a light fitting for a beer. At first, I was grateful for his help. I work full-time, we have a 6-year-old daughter named Isla, and having someone nearby who could fix small things sounded practical. The first time he came up, Renee introduced him as the guy who saved her when the washing machine started flooding. She told the story in a big dramatic way, showing with her hands how the water almost reached the hallway, and Mason stood behind her with an easy grin, letting her describe herself as the damsel in a mess. He called me the serious one, the guy who would have drawn up a detailed plan for how to mop. Everyone laughed. It was a simple joke, but it stuck. After that, Mason began to appear upstairs more often. Sometimes it was to look at the balcony light, sometimes to check the wiring in the kitchen, sometimes just to drop off a misdelivered package from the front entrance. Each time, he seemed to stay a little longer, leaning against the counter, talking with Renee in a low, relaxed voice while I finished cooking or washed dishes. When I was in the room, their conversation stayed simple, about gym classes and neighbors and the weather. When I stepped out to take a work call or help Isla with homework, their voices dropped, and I could hear the difference in the tone even if I could not hear the words. One evening, after Mason left, I told Renee that it felt like he was here a lot, and I asked if she thought there should be some limits. I said it calmly, the way I say everything, trying not to sound like I was giving orders. She told me, indirectly, that I was being paranoid, that she was tired of men who saw danger in every friendship. She said I should be happy she had people in her life who made her feel alive, because I was too quiet to carry all that weight alone. Later that night, I called my mother, Elise, while Isla watched cartoons on the living room rug. I told her that our neighbors seemed very close to Renee, and that some of their jokes made me uncomfortable, and my mother asked if I felt respected in my own home. I answered that I was not sure yet, that I was just watching patterns, a phrase that made sense to me as an IT worker who spends his time tracking small errors back to their source. My father, Nathan, picked up the phone in the background, and when Elise repeated what I had said, he told me to stay calm, not to shout, and to remember names, times, and places instead of throwing accusations into the air. That advice stayed with me. I started using a small pocket notebook I usually kept for work, the one where I write down strange error messages and dates of software changes. Now, mixed between notes about printers and network glitches, small private lines began to appear. M up again, 1845. Just coffee. Door closed, laughing, 21:10. R says I overreact, says M gets her. I did not hide the notebook, but I did not wave it around either. It was just paper tucked into my bag, and there was something steadying about turning vague discomfort into small, clear marks. At night, our bedroom became another kind of quiet. Renee lay on her side with her back to me, phone in hand, screen glowing blue against the dark. Sometimes she smiled at something, one of those small smiles that used to be for me alone. When I asked what she was reading, she said it was just the neighborhood chat, just people sharing memes and making jokes about parking or the broken mailboxes. One night, as she turned over to place her phone on the nightstand, a notification flashed across the top of the screen before it locked. I saw only a few words, but they were enough. Harbor Walk, 6:10 p.m. It looked like a calendar reminder from an app we both used, but I did not remember planning a walk by the harbor with her. I asked lightly what it was, and she answered that it was nothing, just a plan with some people from the building, then added that I should not worry, because I never liked walking by the water anyway. I did not argue. I picked up my own phone, set my alarm for the morning, and opened the calendar app, adding a new recurring reminder of my own. I called it Meeting, personal, and scheduled it at a time when I would usually be alone at lunch, not because I had anything booked yet, but because the empty slot made me feel like I was claiming a small piece of the week for myself for questions I wasn't ready to ask out loud. A few minutes later, as the room grew quiet, another notification slid briefly across Renee's locked screen. This time it came from a messaging thread with a name I had never seen before, a mix of letters and emojis that looked like an inside joke, Harbor Crew. I watched it appear and vanish in less than 2 seconds as she reached out and swiped it away in her sleep, and I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathing, slowly accepting that the story of our building had a group I had never been invited into. The first time Renee used Groceries as a reason to get me out of the apartment, it sounded so ordinary that I almost missed the way she pushed the timing, the way she watched the clock instead of the cupboards. It was a Saturday afternoon, soft light through the kitchen window, cartoon sounds from the living room where Isla lined up her toys. I was rinsing coffee cups when Renee opened the fridge, frowned, and announced that we were low on almost everything. She pulled a notepad from the drawer and started writing a long list with quick strokes, adding items I knew we could survive without for another day or two. I told her we could go together in the evening, after Isla's bath, when the store was quieter, but she shook her head and said she needed the kitchen clear now. She added that she wanted to clean and shower without anyone stepping over her, and that I should take my time at the supermarket, because I never did anything slowly, and it would be good practice. Her words were half joke, half complaint. She pressed the list into my hand and repeated that I should go right away, before the shelves emptied, as if there were some crisis I could not see. As she spoke, I noticed that she kept glancing out toward the balcony, down to where Mason's balcony sat directly below ours. The sliding door was slightly open, and I heard faint music drifting up from his apartment, the sort he always played when he had company or when he wanted people to know he was awake and available. I walked to the balcony and looked down. Mason stood outside, smoking, his phone in his hand, the screen lighting his face. He glanced up, gave me a quick nod, and then turned away, exhaling smoke out toward the street. I went back inside and picked up my keys. Before leaving, I opened the reminder app on my phone and set a simple timer, nothing dramatic, just a countdown I could check later. I wanted to see how long the trip would really take, not the version of time Renee seemed so sure about. I told her, in a level voice, that I would be as fast as I could without forgetting anything, and she made a show of rolling her eyes, telling me I should not treat a grocery list like an urgent work ticket. She added that if I came back complaining, she would tell the whole building I had a meltdown over milk, and the way she smiled made me think she was only half joking. The supermarket was only 10 minutes away by car. I drove there with the list on the passenger seat and the timer quietly counting down in my pocket. Inside, the store buzzed with weekend energy, aisles full of families and couples and people on their own trying to move around each other. I pushed the cart steadily, working through the list from top to bottom. Bread, milk, cereal, fruit, vegetables, cleaning supplies, snacks Isla liked for school. There were a few specialty items Renee had added that took longer to find, things from different sections, but even with those, I moved faster than she had predicted. At one point, as I checked my phone to cross off another item, a new notification flashed at the top of the screen. It was from the neighborhood social app, showing a new photo posted to the building page. I only saw it for a moment before it disappeared, but the caption line caught my eye. Saturday vibes with the best people on our floor. I did not open it. I just made a quiet mental note that someone in our building had enough energy to share their mood publicly while I was out buying paper towels. At the checkout line, the cashier scanned my items while making friendly small talk. She commented that she saw my wife and neighbor at the community center sometimes, that they seemed like the life of the block. She said it in a light tone, assuming it would make me proud, then added that it was nice to see a husband doing the heavy shopping so his partner could enjoy herself a little. I smiled politely and said that everyone had their role, then reached for my wallet. I hesitated for a second, looking at the joint card we usually used for big purchases, then slid it back and pulled out my personal card instead. I could not fully explain why in that moment, only that I wanted a clear line between what I was doing out here and whatever story might be forming back at home. The receipt printed, long and thin, full of numbers that would later matter more than I realized, and I folded it once and put it carefully into my wallet instead of crumpling it into my pocket. When I checked the timer as I walked out to the car, I saw that less time had passed than Renee had warned me about, and one item on the list, A specific brand of cereal had been sold out, so I could have added a few extra minutes searching for an alternative, but I decided not to. I loaded the bags into the trunk and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, looking at the time on the dashboard and the countdown on my phone, feeling a quiet click inside my mind as both numbers settled into place. I started the car and drove back, the route familiar and short, my hand steady on the wheel. When I parked in our building's small lot and stepped out, the air felt heavier than when I had left, as if the whole structure were holding its breath. I carried the bags toward the entrance and noticed, through the glass, that the hallway lights on our floor were already on, even though the timer in my pocket said I had returned earlier than anyone would reasonably expect. As I stepped into the lobby, my phone vibrated with a new alert. It was from the building's social app again, this time a direct notification. I lifted the bag slightly to free my hand and glanced down at the screen. A new post had gone up in the neighborhood group, a picture taken on the stairwell between our floor and Mason's, where I could see two blurred figures laughing, one in a familiar tank top I knew belonged to Renee. The caption sat over the image in bright text, "When the husband finally leaves," followed by a string of laughing emojis. The app showed that I had been tagged in the comments, pulled into the circle without my consent, and as the elevator doors slid open in front of me, I pressed the save icon with my thumb before the notification could fade, carrying the groceries and the new image of my life upstairs at the same time. When the elevator doors slid open and I stepped onto our floor with the grocery bags in my hands, the hallway felt wrong in a way I could not name at first, like walking into a room where someone has moved every object half an inch. The lights were on even though it was still daylight outside, and music drifted from our direction, louder than Renee usually played it when she was alone with Isla. I walked toward our door and saw that it was not fully closed. The latch had caught just enough to keep it from swinging open, but there was a narrow strip of light along the frame. I stood there for a second, the weight of the bags cutting into my fingers, listening. Behind the door, I heard low music, the same type of playlist Mason liked to play on his balcony, and two voices, close together, speaking in soft, overlapping sentences. One of them was Renee's. I knew her tone when she felt admired, that light, bright way she spoke when she believed she was the center of a scene. The other voice was deeper, familiar in a way that tightened my chest before my mind put the name to it. For a moment I thought about setting the bags down, taking a breath, and knocking like a guest, as if I had no right to walk into my own home. Then I remembered the keys in my pocket, the rent that left my account each month, the small lines in my notebook, and I let the key slide into the lock with a quiet click. The movement made the latch slip free, and the door eased inward a few centimeters. The voices stopped. The music kept playing, a cheerful song that felt wrong in the sudden silence. I pushed the door open with my shoulder and stepped inside, the bag swinging slightly, and the scene in the living room resolved in front of me, clear enough that nobody in their right mind would call it nothing. I will not describe it in detail. I do not need to, because the important things were simple. Mason was too close to Renee on the couch, their bodies turned toward each other. Clothes and hair not quite in the shape they would have been in if nothing had happened. A blanket lay twisted across the cushions. A wine bottle stood open on the coffee table next to two half-full glasses, and the TV screen showed a paused movie they clearly had not been watching. Renee's cheeks were flushed. Mason's hand was halfway to his shirt buttons, and the way they jerked apart when they saw me felt more truthful than anything they would say later. I stood in the doorway, the grocery bags hanging at my sides, and for a few long seconds, none of us spoke. My heart hammered hard enough that it hurt, but my voice stayed behind my teeth, waiting for my mind to decide what it wanted to do. Mason recovered first. He stood up, smoothing his shirt with quick movements, and said something in a joking tone about how I had perfect timing, as if I had walked into a surprise party instead of my own living room. His words slid past me, too light for the moment, and my eyes moved instead to the small glowing square on the coffee table. Jonah's phone lay there, screen on, and in the top corner I saw a red circle just as it flickered and turned gray, like a recording app that had been stopped a split second too late. Renee followed my gaze and grabbed the phone with fast fingers, turning it over as if it burned her, then started talking quickly, words tumbling out about misunderstandings and overreactions and nothing happening. I did not answer her. I set the grocery bags down by the entrance, straightened up, and looked around the room like a technician arriving at a broken machine, checking each visible sign. The oven clock in the kitchen still showed the time, only a little later than when I had left. The wine bottle had a label I recognized from a shop near Mason's usual routes. The throw pillow on the floor had one of Mason's keys resting beside it, attached to a key ring I knew did not belong to us. I told myself, in my head, to remember these details now so I would not have to argue about them later. When Mason tried to walk past me toward the door, He clapped me lightly on the shoulder, as if we were teammates after a game, and made a comment about how things could look worse than they were. I stepped aside enough for him to pass, but I did not pretend to agree. I simply said, in a level tone, that I would handle this at home and that he should go downstairs and stay there. The calmness in my voice must have surprised him more than anger would have. His smirk faded for a second, and he left without another joke, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the stairwell. Renee turned on me then, words ready, eyes flashing. She said I had come back early on purpose, that I did not trust her, that I was trying to catch her in something so I could feel powerful for once. She insisted that nothing serious had happened, that they had just been talking and maybe sitting too close, that the wine meant nothing, that the music meant nothing, that the blanket meant nothing. She said that if I had taken my time like a normal person at the store, I would not have walked in at that exact moment, and that my problem was not what she did, but that I expected her to live under my watch. I listened, the way I always listen, but I did not let her arrange the facts into a new shape. I told her, still calmly, that I had written down what time I left and that I had the receipt showing what time I paid for the groceries. I said that I had not rushed home in a panic, I had simply done the shopping and returned, and that whatever I saw was not because I was sneaky, but because of what they chose to do when they believed I would be gone for longer. She laughed sharply and said only a man who worked with spreadsheets would bring receipts into a conversation like this. She told me I was pathetic, that nobody would ever believe I had been wronged, that they would see me as a jealous husband trying to twist a harmless moment into a crime. Later that night, after a long, tense silence that sat between us at the dinner table like a third person, I went into the bedroom alone while she stayed in the living room with the TV on. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my phone, and scrolled through the neighborhood app. Jonah had posted a short video clip to a private group connected to the building, the same red recording circle I had seen earlier now turned into a little thumbnail on my screen. In the clip, I walked through the door with the grocery bags, my face already tight with suspicion even before the camera, held low on the coffee table, swung up to catch me. The angle made it look like I had stomped in, like I had thrown the bags down harder than I remembered, and the caption Jonah had added read, "When the jealous husband returns too soon," followed by laughing reactions. The video did not show what had been happening in the seconds before I opened the door, only my entrance and Renee yelling in the background. For the people watching, it would be simple to decide who the problem was. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment, then moved to the save option. The app confirmed that the clip had been downloaded, a small line of text at the bottom saying that it was now in my gallery. I did not comment, I did not react in the group, I did not message Jonah. I turned off the phone screen and sat in the dark, listening to the muffled sound of Renee's laughter leaking under the bedroom door as she retold the story to someone else, someone who would join the chorus that saw me as the villain and her as the poor, misunderstood woman trapped with a man who came home too early. The days after the grocery incident blurred into a strange mix of normal tasks and quiet shocks, like walking through my usual life while stepping on broken glass that only I could feel. Renee decided quickly that the best defense was performance. Instead of keeping what happened inside our walls, she carried it out into the street, into the small digital spaces that held our neighborhood together, turning my pain into a story she could control. In her version, I had been sulking for weeks, suspicious of every friendship, too jealous to let her breathe. She said she had asked me nicely to take on one simple chore, that I had stormed out with a bad attitude, and that I had then charged back into the apartment like a cop, ready to ruin a harmless hangout. People liked this story because it made sense to them. They knew me as quiet and serious, they knew her as lively and social, and it fit their idea of how such people behaved. I heard pieces of it everywhere. At the park, where I took Isla on Sunday to give her space from the tension at home, two fathers on the next bench talked about how some men could not handle their wives having male friends, and how jealousy made them see things that weren't there. They did not know I could hear them, or maybe they did and decided not to care. Isla climbed the slide and ran across the grass, but after a while she grew tired, climbed onto the bench beside me, and leaned her head against my arm. She asked if Mr. Mason had done something bad, because Mommy had said I hated him now, and if I hated people, she was not supposed to like them either. I told her, slowly, that sometimes adults got confused about what was healthy, that sometimes friends cross lines they should not cross, and that the grown-ups were still figuring it out. She looked up at me with wide eyes and asked if we were going to live in different houses now like a girl in her class whose parents had split up. I felt the words land in the middle of my chest and stay there. I answered that I could not promise the house would always stay the same, but I could promise that I would always be her father, that I would always come for her at school, help with homework, and make her breakfast. That evening, Renee insisted we attend a neighborhood barbecue at the community center hall, saying it would look worse if we stayed away, as if this was a public relations problem more than a family one. The hall was bright and noisy. Tables full of food people had carried in from home, children running between chairs, sticky with barbecue sauce. Renee arrived in a fitted top and jeans that she knew drew attention, laughing loudly as if the past days had been a minor inconvenience. Mason was already there, manning the grill with a beer in his hand, and he raised it in a half salute when he saw us, as if nothing had happened. I stayed near the edge of the room, helping Isla fill a plate, while Renee floated from group to group, telling the grocery story like a comedian polishing a routine. I heard fragments as I moved. She said I had looked like I wanted to arrest them, that the only thing they had done wrong was sit too close on the couch, that I had turned a simple misunderstanding into a drama because I could not stand seeing her enjoy herself. People laughed in the right places. Some shook their heads, saying I needed to relax, that at least she was still at home and not out somewhere else. Jonah stood nearby, phone in hand, capturing the best reactions, nodding along whenever someone called me overprotective. At one point, Mrs. Harrow, the elderly neighbor from across the hall, sat down beside me with a plate of coleslaw and watched the scene in silence. After a while, she said quietly, not looking at me, that she had seen Mason go upstairs many evenings when my car was not in the lot, and that if anyone tried to tell me it was all in my head, I did not need to believe them. Her voice was gentle but firm, the way my mother's voice sounded when she read stories to Isla. I thanked her without making a scene, holding her words like another small, solid piece in the picture forming in my mind. A few nights later, we sat at Veda's dining table for what she called a clearing of the air, although it felt more like a trial. The table was laid with care, plates and glasses perfectly aligned, as if presentation could smooth over the tension. Veda sat at the head, Renee beside her, Jonah across from me with his phone on the placemat. From the moment we sat down, Veda spoke of nothing but my faults. She said I had embarrassed her daughter in front of the building, that I had overreacted to a simple visit from a neighbor, that I had humiliated myself by acting like a jealous teenager. She said if I loved Renee, I would apologize to Mason for thinking badly of him, and that I would post something in the neighborhood group saying I had misunderstood what I saw. When I answered that I had seen enough to know boundaries had been crossed, she accused me of punishing Renee by refusing to let the incident go, pointing out that she had stayed instead of leaving. Jonah added that the video he had recorded showed nothing happening because it only captured the moment I walked in and the argument after, not what had come before. I listened to them, watched Isla pushing peas around her plate at the end of the table, and felt the distance between what they chose to see and what was real grow wider by the minute. When there was a pause, I said, as evenly as I could, that I was not interested in public apologies anymore, that my focus now was on Isla and on creating an environment where lines meant something. Veda said I was threatening her daughter with talk like that. I said I was stating a fact, that something had broken in our home that could not be fixed just by laughing in a community hall. On the drive home, Isla sat in the back seat, unusually quiet. As we pulled into our building's small parking lot, she asked from behind me if this meant we were choosing who to love more, because everyone at dinner had spoken like there were teams. I took a breath before answering, then told her that she did not have to choose between parents, that adults sometimes forgot their words were heavy, and that my job was to carry the heavy parts so she did not have to. A few days later, standing in the school pickup line, I heard two mothers behind me whispering about the grocery husband and saying they hoped their own partners never got that jealous. One of them wondered out loud if Renee would leave me soon, since she clearly had other options. When Isla ran out of the school doors and wrapped her arms around my waist, I saw both women lower their eyes, but the damage was done. On the walk home, Isla asked why other adults looked at us like we were in trouble and if we had done something wrong. I told her that sometimes people like to talk about other people's lives so they did not have to look at their own, and that she had done nothing wrong at all. That night, after she fell asleep, I stood in the kitchen with a pen in my hand and marked upcoming dates on the wall planner, school projects, doctor's appointments, the next barbecue. My hand hovered over the day of the grocery incident, and I drew a small, almost invisible dot beside it. Isla padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, and asked what I was doing. I said I was just making sure I did not forget anything important. She pointed at the date of the barbecue and at the earlier one from the grocery trip and asked in a small voice if those were the days our home started to feel strange. Before I could answer, my phone vibrated on the counter with a muted buzz. The screen lit up with a missed call from an unknown number I had come to recognize, the one saved in my contacts under a simple, serious word: private. I let it ring out and watched the notification settle onto the screen, knowing that the next time I pressed redial, I would not be asking for vague information anymore, but for the first real steps toward changing the shape of our family. The week after that call from the number saved as private, my thoughts shifted from circling the same hurt to moving in a straight line towards something else, something that felt less like revenge and more like finally choosing a door and walking through it. At work, I scheduled a short meeting with HR, framing it as a general question about future planning, the kind people in my position sometimes ask when they are trying to think ahead. The room they put me in was small and bright, with a glass wall that looked out over the open-plan office. On the table sat a notepad and a pen, as if they already knew I would want to write things down. I asked simple questions in a calm voice. How benefits worked if parents did not live together, how emergency contacts could be updated if a child spent more time with one parent than the other, how schedules could be adjusted to handle school pickups. I never used the word divorce. I did not mention Renee or Mason. I did not tell the grocery story. I spoke as if the situation were theoretical, and the HR representative answered as if it were, giving me clear explanations I copied into the same small notebook where I kept my earlier notes about Mason's visits. When the meeting ended, I thanked them and walked down to the building's parking garage instead of going straight back to my desk. Sitting in my car, surrounded by concrete and muffled engine noise, I put on my headphones and opened the contact called Private. I started the call and listened more than I spoke. The voice on the other end asked steady questions. How long Renee and I had been married, who usually took Isla to school, who attended parent meetings, whether there were any records of what had happened in the apartment and at the barbecue. I answered as simply as I could, sticking to dates and facts, the same way I would describe a long-running computer bug that had finally shown its full pattern. When the call ended, I took the sticky note from my notebook and wrote a specific date and time on it, circling it once. Then I slipped it back between the pages, where it looked like any other reminder. That night, after Isla was asleep and the apartment had settled into uneasy quiet, I cleared a space on the small desk in our living room. I brought out 3 binders I had bought earlier and labeled them in my neat handwriting, Home, Auto, Bank. Inside the home binder, I added a section called Household and another thinner one called Utilities. I began sliding printed bank statements, utility bills, and receipts into plastic sleeves, paying attention to dates that matched my notes about Mason and the grocery run. Whenever I saw a charge from a day when I knew I had been at work and Mason's car had been in the lot, I noted it down in the notebook, adding initials and times in the margin. On my laptop, I opened a clean desktop folder and split it into 2 parts, naming them Archive A and Archive B. Slowly, carefully, I moved saved videos, screenshots, and photos into those folders, making sure there were copies in both. Every time a small cloud icon appeared in the corner of the screen with the words File uploaded successfully, something inside me loosened a little, as if each confirmation was proof that I was not crazy, that the story could be told in more than gossip and laughter. Renee walked past the desk at one point, glanced at the binders, and laughed. She told a friend on the phone that I was turning our marriage into a filing cabinet, that I was collecting paper instead of real feelings. And she made it sound like another joke at my expense. I let her talk. When she moved away, I closed the home binder and placed it on the shelf, its spine lined up with the others, then stepped out onto the balcony with my headphones again for a shorter call, one that only confirmed the date we had marked earlier. Later, in the kitchen, I opened a cupboard door and stuck the small sticky note with the circled date on the inside where only I would see it. Under the numbers, I wrote 2 plain words, Bring forms. The next morning, when Renee tried to start another argument about how cold I had been at the barbecue and at her mother's table, I listened until she accused me of ruining her life by holding one mistake over her head forever. Then I told her, in the same even tone I used at work, that I was finished arguing in circles, that I would not shout or insult her, and that from now on I would handle everything properly. I said that my focus was on Isla's stability and on clear arrangements, not on whether the neighborhood liked our story. She called me dramatic, said I was trying to scare her with vague threats, and slammed the front door as she left for the gym. The echo of the door had barely faded when my phone, sitting on the counter next to the sink, started to vibrate. The screen lit up with an alarm I had set days earlier, the label glowing in simple letters. Paper drop. I reached over, watched it flash once more, then tapped it off with my thumb, turning back to the dishes with the quiet certainty that the next time that phrase appeared, it would be more than a reminder. The morning the reminder became reality started like any other school day on the surface, with Isla's sleepy eyes, her small backpack, and the familiar rush of matching socks. I moved through the routine step by step, checking homework, tying laces, pouring cereal, all with a kind of careful focus, as if each small action needed to be done right because the bigger ones were about to change everything. When we reached my parents' house, Elise opened the door with a soft smile and let Isla run inside to show her a drawing from school. Nathan stood behind her, holding 2 mugs of coffee, and his eyes met mine over Isla's head. I told them quietly that there would be papers in motion by the afternoon, that they were written to keep Isla's schedule and home as steady as possible, and that I would need them to follow whatever plan came out of those pages. Elise nodded once and said, in an indirect way, that sometimes the only way to protect a child was to stop pretending the house was not on fire. Nathan placed a hand on my shoulder and said he trusted me to stay calm. From there, I drove to the office tower where I worked, but instead of going up to my floor, I parked in the garage and sat for a moment with the engine off. I checked my phone and saw the calendar reminder for meeting personal pop up at the time we had chosen, and beneath it, another alert, paper drop. This time I did not silence it. I dismissed both notifications and stepped out of the car, my footsteps echoing lightly in the garage as I headed toward the elevators. The lobby was high and bright, full of glass and stone and the low murmur of people moving through their own mornings. I found a place near one of the columns where I could see the entrance clearly but would not be the first person anyone noticed. A few minutes later, the process server I had spoken to on the phone walked over, carrying a plain folder in his hand. We spoke briefly, confirming details. Renee's full legal name, a rough arrival window Veda had given her, the fact that I would not approach until after the envelope was in her hands. Inside that folder was the thing all my small notes, binders, and saved clips had been building toward, a petition to dissolve the marriage, supported by a record of events, not by anger. The pages described the grocery incident, the repeated visits from Mason when I was gone, the barbecue performance, the effect of all this on Isla's emotional state. They also included temporary orders for custody and possession, written in the same calm language, giving me primary temporary residence with Isla in our apartment, and setting a schedule that kept her school and daily life stable while everything else changed. When Renee finally came through the revolving doors, she was not alone. Veda walked beside her, speaking in quick, sharp bursts, her hands moving as if she were rehearsing a speech. I could tell from their faces that they expected a hard conversation upstairs, maybe a last chance to pull me back into the old pattern where I apologized for feeling hurt. They did not see me by the column at first. The process server stepped away from the seating area and into their path, his voice clear and professional as he addressed Renee by her full legal name. She stopped mid-sentence, turned toward him, and frowned. He explained in simple terms that he was there to serve her with a petition and temporary orders, and that she was being officially notified of the proceedings. He held out the envelope. For a second, she just stared at it, as if touching it would make something final she did not want to name. Then she snatched it from his hand and tore it open. Veda began talking even faster, saying that this was insane, that I was ambushing Renee at my job, that no decent man would use paperwork to hurt the mother of his child. Her words bounced off the polished stone and glass, but the papers did not answer her. They just lay open in Renee's hands. From where I stood, I could see her eyes move down the first page, reading phrases about recorded neighbor interactions, witness accounts of Mason's visits, the date and time of the grocery incident, and the note about Isla's primary residence remaining with me in the apartment for now. Her face changed in small steps. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and something like fear when she reached the lines that listed who usually took Isla to school, who scheduled doctor appointments, who had been present at school meetings. She looked up and finally saw me by the column. For a long moment we just stared at each other across the lobby. Then she asked, in a voice that carried even without being raised, how I could do this to her, how I could make her look like a villain to strangers, how long I had been planning this attack while acting calm. I walked toward them until I was close enough to be heard clearly but far enough to give the server space. I told her, in the same steady voice I had used the day I left for the groceries, that I had not written her choices, only recorded them. I said that I was done arguing in kitchens and community halls, done trying to fix a story that kept changing to make me the problem. I told her that from now on, everything about our marriage and about Isla would go through the court and the orders she was holding, that there would be no more performances in front of neighbors where my pain was the punchline. Veda started to protest again, saying I would regret this, that judges did not like men who punished mothers, but her words sounded thinner now that they had to compete with the neat black lines on the page. The process server checked his watch and wrote the time and location on a small form, finishing his part in this story with the same calm I was trying to keep. Behind me, the elevator bell chimed, and the building noise rose and fell like usual. I glanced once more at Renee, still gripping the papers that had finally given shape to consequences she never believed would arrive, then turned away. As I walked toward the glass doors, I saw my reflection in them for a brief second. The calm man, the helpful man, now holding nothing in his hands but his own choice. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, letting in the light and the noise of the street, and I stepped outside, leaving the rest of the fight to the process I had chosen and to the words already written on the pages behind me.